So Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White got into it. They absolutely got into it. And even more so, this continued onto the bench at the end of the first quarter. This continued onto the bench at the end of the first. And it wasn't even with Steph White. So if you can see, Caitlin Clark got into what looked to be a heated argument with Breanne January on the sideline. What looks to be a fairly heated argument about that possession.
What unfolded during the Indiana Fever's matchup against the Seattle Storm was far more than just another disappointing defensive performance. It was the kind of collapse that instantly raises serious questions about the direction of this team and the frustration boiling beneath the surface inside that locker room. And no one looked more fed up in that moment than Caitlin Clark herself. Cameras caught every reaction as the defensive mistakes piled up possession after possession, and her body language told a story that the post-game interviews tried to soften. This was not the reaction of a player simply upset over one tough loss. This looked like someone exhausted from watching the exact same problems continue to sabotage games the Fever should have been able to control. What makes the situation even more alarming is that these defensive breakdowns are no longer isolated incidents. They have become a recurring weakness that opponents are clearly targeting, and the frustration surrounding it is starting to spill into public view. When your franchise centerpiece is visibly challenging communication, effort, and defensive execution on the sideline in front of a national audience, it signals something much deeper than normal in-game emotion. It points to growing tension, unanswered issues within the system, and a team still searching for answers while pressure continues to rise around every single performance. That was more than just frustration from Caitlin Clark. It looked like a superstar finally reaching a point where she could not ignore the same defensive problems hurting this team over and over again. When your franchise player is openly reacting to blown coverages, poor communication, and repeated mistakes on the sideline, the issue becomes much bigger than basketball strategy. That is why this moment is sending shockwaves across the WNBA. Fans are not angry because of one bad game against the Seattle Storm. They are angry because these defensive issues have been building all season and nothing seems to be changing. The reaction online exploded immediately after the game because supporters feel like the warning signs have been obvious for weeks. Now every concern about this coaching staff, this team's defensive identity, and the organization's ability to properly support and protect their superstar player is being pushed directly into the spotlight. Drop your thoughts in the comments because this situation is getting harder and harder for the Indiana Fever coaching staff to explain. What made this defensive possession look so bad was the fact that it was not some advanced play designed to confuse the defense. It was a simple guard-to-guard screen, the type of action players practice constantly from the first days of training camp. In most situations, the read is obvious. You switch and keep the play in front of you. But instead, the Fever looked completely disconnected, and the breakdown exposed just how shaky this team still looks defensively when the pressure rises and every detail matters. What makes the moment even worse is when it happened. This came immediately after an incredible shot that should have completely shifted momentum in Indiana's favor. Instead of building off that energy, the team instantly fell apart on the other end of the floor. Going from a huge emotional high to total defensive confusion in a matter of seconds perfectly sums up where this team stands right now. And judging by the reaction from Caitlin Clark, the frustration inside this organization is clearly starting to boil over.
That is what they do. But with about 40-something seconds to go in the quarter, the play that ended up kind of right after, and this is, by the way, right after Caitlin Clark hit the, a few seconds after Caitlin Clark hit the 30-footer, when everything's talking about the 30-footer. So Caitlin Clark is guarding Zia Cook on the wing. And it is a defensive possession where it's 32-17 and, or was it, yeah, sorry, Lexi had just been blocked. And I'm going to show you guys what happens this possession, because it is kind of important to show what happens here. So Caitlin Clark starts off this defensive possession guarding Zia Cook. The problem is this is a guard-to-guard screen. So conventional knowledge is that you switch a guard-to-guard screen.
After watching that possession unfold, the biggest question fans are asking is impossible to ignore. How does a team with this much attention, This much talent in the backcourt, and this much pressure to compete still struggle with something so basic defensively. If this roster has spent months preparing through training camp and preseason, why are these simple reads still falling apart once the game intensity rises? And that leads to an even more uncomfortable conversation. Is this strictly a player mistake, or does the responsibility fall on the coaching staff and the preparation behind the scenes? Because those are two very different problems. The reality is that breakdowns on simple guard-to-guard screens usually do not happen because players suddenly forget fundamental basketball principles. They happen because communication breaks down, assignments are not being called out early enough, or the defensive system has not been drilled enough for reactions to become automatic under pressure. And when those same mistakes continue showing up repeatedly, it naturally shifts more attention toward the coaching staff and the overall structure being put in place around Caitlin Clark and the rest of this roster. What makes this moment so concerning is not just the mistake itself, but what it reveals underneath it. When a player hesitates on a switch that should be automatic, that hesitation usually points to something deeper: confusion, lack of clarity, or uncertainty within the system. And in basketball, that kind of uncertainty doesn't appear randomly. It builds from preparation, communication, and how clearly roles are defined by the coaching staff. That's why this possession starts to feel less like a simple defensive error and more like a reflection of a bigger structural issue inside the Indiana Fever setup. Because when the same kinds of breakdowns keep repeating, it raises real questions about what is actually being reinforced in practice and whether the defensive system is truly being absorbed by the players. But what took this situation beyond the game itself was what happened right after. As the first quarter came to a close, cameras picked up a tense sideline moment involving Caitlin Clark and an assistant coach. And this wasn't a quiet exchange or a quick emotional reaction that faded away. The conversation carried intensity, body language, and visible frustration that made it impossible to ignore. Clark wasn't stepping back from the moment. If anything, the exchange appeared to escalate as she made her point repeatedly while the bench situation unfolded in real time in front of a national audience. And that's exactly why this clip is getting so much attention, because it wasn't just about one defensive possession anymore. It became a snapshot of rising tension, growing frustration, and a team still searching for answers when things start to break down under pressure.
So Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White got into it. They absolutely got into it. And even more so, this continued onto the bench at the end of the first quarter. This continued onto the bench at the end of the first. And it wasn't even with Steph White. So if you can see, Caitlin Clark got into what looked to be a heated argument with Breanne Jandery on the sideline. An absolutely, what looks to be a fairly heated argument about that possession. And the thing is, from everything we've kind of seen with Caitlin Clark, it does appear that she's the type of person where it's like, if she thinks she's right, she will continue to argue. It doesn't matter who it's with. It doesn't matter who it's with. Anyone who's been around people, a lot of high level people, if they're just told, if you're in school, how many of the very, very smart kids, when a teacher tells them they're wrong and they know they're right, and they will argue with the teacher that, no, I'm right, you're wrong. It's a common thing amongst high achievers, a common thing amongst top level athletes and everything to argue with coaches. Especially.
Now the question every single viewer is left wrestling with after watching that moment is simple, but uncomfortable. Is this kind of sideline confrontation a sign of a team starting to fracture under pressure? Or is it actually the natural result of a competitor who cares so deeply that she refuses to accept anything less than better from everyone around her? Because the line between accountability and frustration is not always clear. At what point does a player holding her coaching staff to a higher standard become something else? A sign that the frustration with the system has finally reached a breaking point. And what does it say about the internal culture of a team when disagreements that intense are no longer staying behind closed doors, but instead spilling out on the bench in real time for everyone to see? The honest reality is that in every era of elite sports, the greatest competitors have almost always been the ones who refuse to accept answers they don't believe in. even when those answers come from authority figures. Elite athletes are not built to simply comply when something feels wrong to them. They challenge, they question, and they push for standards they believe should be higher, even if it creates tension in the moment. And that same mindset is exactly what defines Caitlin Clark. The intensity she shows in those sideline exchanges is not separate from her game. It's the same competitive fire she brings to every possession on the floor. The difference is that on the court, that fire becomes production, leadership, and impact. But when it spills onto the bench in front of cameras, it transforms into something else entirely. A public reflection of pressure, frustration, and a team environment that may be reaching its limit in how much internal tension it can carry without it becoming visible to everyone watching.